A country located on the southern edge of the African continent. It also covers the small sub-Atlantic island of the Princess Edward Island. Botswana, Lesotho, Mozambique, Namibia, Swaziland, and Zimbabwe are all bordering countries. The form of government is a republic where the president is the head of state and the head of government. Has a mixed economy which combined with centralized economic planning and government regulation. Has various private freedom. What is this country? This is South Africa. South Africa is still facing rising public debt, inflated state-owned enterprise, and production pressure that have reduced the country's global competitiveness. Even so, South Africa has a highly developed economy and a thriving economic infrastructure, making the country a leading African economy and home to 75% of Africa's largest business. The IMF forecast update from 14 April 2020 showed that the economy grew 0.2% in 2019 compared to 0.8% in 2018 and fell to minus 5.8% in 2020 due to the COVID-19 outbreak and increased to 4% in 2021. However, this principle cannot solve some of the world's systemic problems. Manufacturing and management policy have not been able to overcome some of the world's systemic problems at 59.9%. Government debt is still high and debt serving costs are almost 14% of revenue. The IMF forecasts an estimate 4.9% 2020 deficit, which is increased to 5.1% in 2021. Inflation will drop to 4.1% over the same period from 4.6% in 2018. According to the new IMF World Economic Forecast, it could decline to 2.4% in 2020 and increase to 3.2% in 2021. In 2019, the unemployment rate in South Africa was slightly reaching 28.7%. compared to 27.1% in 2018. According to a study released by Statistics South Africa mid-year population is expected to have risen to 59.62 million in 2020, with approximately 15.5 million people, 26.0%, living in this province. Gauteng continued to account for the largest share of the population of South Africa. The second largest population was registered in KwaZulu-Natal with approximately 11.5 million people. Northern Cape retained its position as the lowest population province in the nation with a population estimate at 1.29 million people. The study revealed that about 51.1%, approximately 30.5 million of the population is female. Around 28.6% of the population is younger than 15 years of age, according to the study, and about 9.1%, 5.4 million, are 60 years of age or older. Of those under age of 15, the majority live in KwaZulu-Natal, 21.8%, and Gauteng, 21.4%. Of the elderly, those aged 60 years and older, 24.1%, 1.31 million, live in Gauteng. The proportion of elderly people aged 60 and older from 9.1% in 2020 to 7.6% in 2002.
Are two main macroeconomic issues in South Africa, which is inflation and unemployment. Inflation in South Africa is measured using the Consumer Price Index or CPI, meaning that the average spending or living cost of a person. It is calculated by the measuring the rise in the price of this basket of goods over 12 months. Based on the statistic, South Africa's inflation is to be said been quite stable for the past years, leveling off between 4.1% and 6.3%, and is in fact expected to stabilize at around 3% in the future. Inflation rate of a country is a very important key factor to determine the country's economic strength. This year, October 2020, South African inflation unexpectedly accelerated in October to the highest rate in 7 months, driven by food, non-alcoholic beverage, housing, and utilities. The consumer inflation rate rose up to 3.3% in October, up from September's 3.0%. October's result marked the highest inflation rate since March. For the time being, the trend was stable with annual average inflation coming in at September's 3.4% in October. There are three factors that are influencing inflation. First, high debt. The government debt in South Africa is still high at 59.9% and nearly 14% of revenues, which is the cost of debt service. The IMF is expected the public debt to increase, hitting 64.2% in 2020 and 67.9% in 2021 in the next couple of years. Next, push inflation, where it occurs when the price of goods rise because of a cost increase somewhere in the production line, such as the labor or the overall cost of production itself. Besides that, the extent of the wage push inflation in South Africa, where the labor market is characterized by a powerful and highly centralized union movement, highly unequal distribution of income and wealth, and widespread poverty even among full-time workers in a number of sectors. And the last factor is food inflation. The negative economic effects of the lockdowns continue to ravage the economy. The poor, many of whom survive hand-to-mouth in the informal sector, have been particularly hard hit. Based on the statistics above, annual consumer inflation retreated slightly in November to 3.2% from 3.3% in October. There was no monthly change in the index. Food and non-alcoholic beverage prices continued to climb, recording an aggregate annual increase of 5.8%, up from 5.4% in October. Food inflation contributed 1.0 percentage point to November's headline rate of 3.2%. As a category, bread and cereals recorded an annual price rise of 4.2% in November. Moreover, the oils and fats category of annual change in prices was 8.3%. Cooking oil prices climbed by 9.3% over the last year and margarine by 7.9%. Furthermore, the category of hot beverage, it has increased by 6.2% on an annual basis. Next is macroeconomic issue on unemployment on South Africa. As you can see, South Africa's unemployment rate increased slightly in 2019, reaching 28.7% against 27.1% in 2018. According to the World Economic Outlook of the IMF, October 2020 expects this trend to be heavily affected by the negative economic impact of the COVID-19 pandemic. It is said that the rate being currently estimated to increase to 35.3% in 2020 and decline slightly to 34.1% in 2021. The country's unemployment rate stay high, especially when the non-working population who is no longer seeking work is taken into account. Moreover, unemployment rates are much higher among the young population and the black majority of South Africans. COVID-19 has definitely impacted on South Africa and brought so many challenges, which is there is a decline of about 18% in employment. The situation is getting even worse as every third income earner in February did not earn income in April. It is also said that mostly among women and manual labor, they will always lose a job. There are three factors influencing unemployment. The first factor is inequality. South Africa's inequality in the country has been increasing until it is considered one of the most unequal in the world. It is said that a smaller part of the population still lives on €1 per day. In fact, according to a March 2018 paper by the World Bank, South Africa had a Gini coefficient, a statistic measure of the distribution of wealth, of 0.63 in 2015, making it the worst in the world. Large segments of the poor majority lack access to a decent housing and adequate infrastructure service. It is mostly in rural areas and townships which populated by the poor black and mixed race color inhabitants. Other than that, Recently, the local government, with no sympathy, periodically expel residents live in informal housing and often lack legal property ownership, settle squatters, and destroy their homes. The second factor is criminal justice system capacity. Even though South Africa has a relatively well-resourced national police force, there are vigilant mob justice, and at times the police use heavy-handed, abusive tactics to quell crime and public unrest. Several police leaders also have been implicated in misconduct inquiries or corruption. Violent criminal cases such as notably murder, rape, and gun crime is very high. The causes of these high crimes are diverse. In addition to criminal motivations, analysts have identified grievance and factors arising from socio-economic inequalities and marginalization. The last factor is extreme racial disparities. Despite the continuous implementation of land redistribution initiatives, there are also extreme racial disparities in access to land since 1994. The state has purchased large amounts of land intended to be transferred under population that had limited or inability to own land under the apartheid system. Those populations are primarily black, colored, or Indian descent. As a result, the small minority white population continues to own over 70% of land nationally.
Next, we go to the how to overcome unemployment. Okay, this is South Africa unemployment rate from 1999. First, increase the supply of skilled labor. It is because the number of people who receive tertiary training education increased. Second, strengthen market institution. To achieve the goals, they generate 11 million additional jobs, which would require real GDP to grow by 5.4% annually. Third, they do promote a small business in many developed and developing nations, create jobs. Some 19% of jobs will be created in small and expanding firms. Last one, public employment. An essential element of any employment strategy, such community works, are examples of public employment programs. Those opportunities will be needed over the entire period. Okay, let's go jump to inflation. How to overcome inflation? They do contractionary fiscal policy. In South Africa, fiscal policy is a hot topic right now. On 28 November 2019, the government spending increased by 7.3% in 2017 and 2018. The article below discusses the latest government financial statistic as released by Statistics South Africa. The South Africa government spent 7.3% more in 2017 and 2019 than in 2016 and 2017. The rise was largely driven by general public service, education, and health. In the last one, education was the second biggest driver, increasing expenditure by 22 billion. The National Student Financial Aid Scheme was a major contributor to increased payment to students in need of financial support.
As a conclusion, we find that inflation and unemployment are serious issues in South African economy. The study has shown that there are several causes of this macroeconomic problem, which is inflation and unemployment. In South African countries, high debt, push inflation, and food inflation are believed as the main causes for the inflation issues. Meanwhile, the causes of unemployment in South Africa can be derived from inequality, criminal justice system capacity, and extreme racial disparities. As far as the economic development of any country is concerned, provided that the level of unemployment in its economy will be low, the economic situation in the country will be rising. Therefore, unemployment and inflation are related, and this relationship should be noted that the effects of inflation and unemployment on economic growth were extraordinarily extensive in South Africa. The government must take serious action to prevent this issue from continuing happening. In order to overcome inflation, the government should increase the supply of skilled labor, strengthen market institutions, and promote a small business. In other hand, to overcome unemployment issue, the government must be concerned on managing the fiscal policy and constructionary monetary policy. Next, we move on to the future outlook. Today, the 4th Industrial Revolution 4IR is a most hot topic that can be related to the future outlook in order to tackle the issue of inflation and unemployment in South Africa. Digitalization, artificial intelligence, AI, cloud computing, robotics, and 3D printing are driving the 4IR with clear and major consequences for education, jobs, and the future of work. The 4IR will greatly affect the skills required in the labor market. Demand is changing across the world for adaptable cognitive skills that are relational, interpersonal, and non-repetitive, and away from routine tasks and restricted skills linked to the particular occupations.
In the labor market, the change expected in the 4IR is focused on the greater productivity as people and machines learn to work together, strengthen supply chains, and eventually boost economic growth. As South Africa tries to kickstart their economy, this is especially important in South Africa. African countries need to follow national policy for education and skill growth in order to catch up with other continents, concentrating not only on young people, but also on adult workers, dropout, informal workers, and those from economically and socially marginalized communities. African countries can only develop an adaptable and agile workforce that is ready for the 4IR by resolving these skill and education mismatches. In conclusion, adopting technologies could help South Africa economic grow and create more jobs opportunity. But this can only happen if government respond appropriately and keep up with these digital trends.